Okay. Welcome to Black Resistance in the Stress Era, a commemoration of the lives of Ricardo Buck and Craig Mitchell. My name is Lloyd Simpson, and I'll be moderating our panel this afternoon. I'd like to thank the General Baker Institute for hosting and live streaming this event, and I want to thank our panel for taking the time to share with us this history of police violence, its impact on the Black community, and the struggle against it. I'll introduce the panel after I elaborate on what I mean by a history of police violence and provide some context for those unfamiliar with the stress unit. The origins of the police lie in the subjugation of the enslaved and the repression of the worker. This has been made clear by both historical memory of the Black community and any scholarship, any credible, and what any credible scholarship will show. Throughout the history of this white settler colonial state, the only thing the police have made safe in relation to Black people is two things: the superstructure of white supremacy and the basic interests of capital. Black people themselves, of course, understand this better than anyone and have throughout time. Throughout every historical epoch in the making of this nation, Black people have resisted systematic state-sanctioned violence against them. Once the classic method of lynching was the rope, now it's the policeman's bullet. We submit that the killing of Black people has become police policy in the United States, and that police policy is the most practical expression of government policy. That's from We Charge Genocide, a petition presented to the United Nations by the Civil Rights Congress in 1951. This could have been written in 1971, or 2021 for that matter, because throughout all the stages of so-called reformation, the fundamental purpose of police in our society has not changed. If anything, the billions invested by the state to militarize and expand the reach of police power has only enabled it to become ever more omnipresent in the lives of working class Black people. Between 1957 and 1973, police killed more than 220 people in the city of Detroit. 80% were Black, 21% were just teenagers. In the early 1970s, Detroit was the deadliest city per capita in the nation for police murder. Ricardo Buck and Craig Mitchell were among those children shot dead by the police. But they weren't killed by ordinary cops. They were murdered by a covert decoy unit that was meant to entrap young Black men in petty theft cases. This single unit was responsible for 22 killings alone in a 3-year span between 1971 and 1973. Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, better known as STRESS, or what the community knew as the Kill Squad. STRESS was brought into being by then Police Commissioner John Nichols and Inspector James Bannon after Mayor Roman Gribbs ordered a study of crime in the city. A decade of Black rebellion, coupled with the most significant gains in the Black freedom struggle since Reconstruction, triggered an unprecedented investment of public resources into law enforcement to combat rising crime. Though white and capital flight was already well underway in the cities across the nation, liberals and conservatives alike attributed crime more to the criminal pathology of Black people rather than structural inequality and racism, despite the overwhelming evidence to the latter. In reality, the specter of uprising still loomed, especially in Detroit, where one of the largest rebellions in the history of the United States took place just 4 years prior to the creation of STRESS. The Detroit police justified targeting the Black community by manipulating suspect crime data to suit its agenda. In addition to an increase in local spending on police, between 1970 and 1973, the city of Detroit received $10 million from the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration as a result of Lyndon Johnson's omnibus crime bill. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $70 million in our time. Emboldened and funded by the federal government, local police developed and implemented proactive policing strategies, or what is called predictive policing. It is within this context that the STRESS unit emerges. And I quote, "What is at stake here," said James Bannon in reaction to an anti-STRESS demonstration in the fall of 1971, "is whether or not we can effectively police the Black community." On the night of September 17, 1971, Officer Richard Warbeck played decoy in a STRESS operation on the corner of John R. and Belmont near the North End Family Center, where a group of children were sitting on the steps. There were 2 more officers on foot and 1 surveilling from a car. Warbeck was pretending to be drunk. He claimed in the official report that Ricardo and Craig surrounded him and attacked him with a metal rod, trying to steal a decoy watch. He yelled he was the police. Warbeck says the boys ran and did not halt when he gave them the command, so he shot. Something he was authorized to do under the departmental statutes on the use of deadly force regarding suspected felons fleeing a crime. This is what is reflected in the police report. However, as we all know, cops lie. As cold-blooded as the false statement was, the truth is even worse. Witness accounts and evidence directly contradict the statements in the report. Warbeck was not alone in the shooting. Ricardo Buck was shot at close range in his chest and also in his back with 2 different types of ammunition. The watch was planted on his body after he was killed. Craig Mitchell was likely shot by one of the 2 officers surveilling nearby. They covered it up as if it was routine, because it was. The murders of Ricardo Buck and Craig Mitchell was the 8th time the Stress Unit had killed since its inception that year. The Wayne County prosecutor found no wrongdoing on the part of the officers. The Wayne County prosecutor found no wrongdoing on the part of the officers. However, the murders of Ricardo Buck and Craig Mitchell would be a turning point in galvanizing an anti-stress movement that had already begun building in the city of Detroit. From here, we'll turn to our panel. I'll introduce each of our speakers and give them around 10 to 15 minutes to explain their relationship to the case and to the broader anti-stress movement in their own words. Though I may ask some clarifying questions throughout, I ask that the audience hold their question until the Q&A at the end, so each of our guests have a chance to speak. I'd like to start with Gino Fortune, who is a friend of Buck and Mitchell and one of the numerous witnesses to what took place that night. So Gino, if you could, give your account of what happened.
Well, my name is Gino Fortune. I was a member of the surroundings as far as I lived on Belmont. And the North End Family Center was my main focus of protection, as well as, you know, my home, really. Like I said, that was my home. It was a community center ran by Mr. Holloway here, who provided not only finance for the kids in the neighborhood, but he provided a place to live, a place to go. Him and Sister Elizabeth provided food, everything neighborhood needed, it was there. We can go at the North End Family Center any time of the night and play basketball when we got ready. I mean, it was a place of refuge for the kids in the neighborhood. I mean, the police were, I don't know if they were allowed, but they stayed clear of the North End Family Center. That was our place of refuge as far as doing, you know, being in the neighborhood. But anyway, on that night, we were all sitting on the steps of the North End Family Center, doo-wopping, singing, just having fun like we usually do. And all of a sudden, you know, which was not common, here's a white guy in our neighborhood. You know, he had a gas can, you know, to where he was stranded, you know, didn't know where to go or whatever. So we basically went to him offering somewhat help, if nothing else, or whatever. We hadn't had intentions on robbery, or nothing like that. But as we talked to the guy or whatever, found out he was lost or whatever, he didn't know where to go to get the gas. So after talking for a while, here it is. I mean, it was 4 of us, me, Buck, Craig, Glenn, I think Rob also, and myself. We basically had surrounded the guy, you know, seeing what was going on with him. And it wasn't until he lunged at Buck that we all just attacked. I mean, hey, he jumped on one of us, you know? So there's a crowd on him or whatever. And well, like I say, hey, our intentions were to kick his butt because he offended one of us. So after we all had him down or whatever, he started hollering, police, police. That's when I felt, hey, it was my time to exit, you know, and get the hell out of there. Because, hey, it's police, and my focus was getting to the gym. Like I said, that was our refuge. Getting to the gym, to go all the way in the gym, as I heard bullets zinging past my ear, you know. I made it in, you know, went down to the boiler room, locked the door, because couldn't nobody get in the boiler room. Hey, I wouldn't come out until they, hey, you go get my mom's. Hey, I'm not coming up out of here. Because what I witnessed before I got to the steps, I witnessed these police was everywhere, infiltrated the whole neighborhood. They was coming out of cracks, out of bushes and everywhere. You know, police with big guns or whatever. And I mean, I was afraid, you know, for my life or whatever. And I knew they was coming. I was one of the crowd. They was coming for me. So, like I said, I made it to the gym area or whatever, and I wouldn't come out. But before I went down there, I'm watching this big, heavy-set white guy. He pushed Buck off of him. Buck literally ran into him. And he pushed him off, and boom, he shot him in the chest with the shotgun, you know. And I looked over there where Craig's, you know, body was, and he, I'm watching the police shoot down at the cement, sparks flying everywhere. After he had dropped Craig or whatever, I mean, sparks coming off the ground, you know. But hey, I continued, hey, to the gym, and I went down in the boiler room and I wouldn't come out. But like I say, I seen all this stuff happening or whatever, and our intentions weren't to rob this guy. Our intention was to kick his butt because Buck was the baby of the family, more or less, so the guys that hung out. And if you mess with, you know, Buck, you gotta mess with everybody, you know. So, you know, as far as what the police said or whatever, that's all a lot of, you know, I'm pretty sure they're gonna cover it up or whatever, you know, but hey. The day before, it was a white man coming in the neighborhood. He was drunk. I think he had got robbed about 3 times. When he came to me, I took this guy somewhere in the suburbs, got in his car, took him home to the suburbs, where I was greeted by a white lady, and she told me, hey, I appreciate you bringing him home or whatever. I said, yeah, it was, or he got robbed about 3 times. His back pockets was hanging off of him or whatever. But like I say, our intentions were not to rob this guy. It was to try to help him, maybe earn a few dollars or whatever, you know. But like I said, it didn't turn out that way, and I, you know, I hate that I took part in it or whatever. But then again, like I say, my part I played in it was innocence, and I hope justice do prevail, which it didn't at the time, and it may not never be, the real truth may not never be told. But like I say, I know what's inside of me, what really happened, and like I said, you know, it's just a shame. So basically, you know, if you have any questions, anything I forget, feel free to ask me, because I have total recall, because like I said, it all hurt. I mean, it still hurts today to know that I was involved in that. You know, I can't help to feel sadness because, like I said, I took part in that. And I'll pray to God that, hey, something, you know, something good come out of it. You know, I'm thankful for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you. So Gino, Ricardo and Craig were friends of yours,
Yes.
correct?
Right.
Could you tell me a little bit about them? You know, like, who were they?
Yeah, well, Buck, well, Craig had came from the projects. He was going with one of our females, Monica. He was going with Monica or whatever. Buck was more or less, you know, was the baby of the family. Everybody looked out for Buck or whatever. Because, like I said, it was immediate response to when the guy pushed on, you know, launched at Buck. I mean, hey, I think it was to protect him or whatever, you know. I mean, robbery was so far out of our minds or whatever. Maybe if we can make a few dollars out of this or whatever, you know, that's a good thing or whatever, you know. But like I said, we wasn't there to rob this guy. We was there to try to help him to try to earn a few dollars or whatever. That's about it, you know. But really, Craig and Buck they were just like that. They was going with two sisters, you know. I mean, they stayed together and they hung out together and hey, they look out for each other that way. All of us looked out for each other. That was the glue that kept us all together. Couldn't nobody come in the North End Family Center and do anything to one of us and didn't get some repercussions from it, you know. And like I said, Buck was something. I mean, he basically kept everybody, you know, together, you know, as far as, you know, having the glue to keep us together as a family. Like, hey, we felt like a family. We felt, I mean, Mr. Holloway provided a family atmosphere or whatever. He was all of our dads, you know. I mean, hey, you know, could you imagine somebody coming there and doing something or whatever? I mean, it's a family atmosphere. Even this Sister Elizabeth was a black nun. She provided a lot of support for us, you know, a lot of support. And hey, she, you know, I mean, I'll always be grateful to her and Mr. Holloway, you know, for the help they gave us as kids, you know, growing up or whatever. It was, you know, something good that, hey, I felt God sent, you know, sent them both, you know. And like I said, we were all close. But that night was horrifying to me, you know, something I'll never forget. It stays with me, you know. I still have dreams about things that happened that night, and it was, you can say it was good, you can say it was bad, but like I said, I didn't justify anything we did, you know, because I can't justify nothing, you know, because, hey, we reacted like a family and went to the end. I mean, we were a family and we reacted like a family. So, you know, to say what kind of guys they were part of the family. It was my little brother, you know, they was, you know, it was just a family atmosphere. Even I was closer than my real siblings, you know, I was close, you know. So, I mean, my mother, if I didn't get to the house on time, my mother cooked dinner. Hey, if I didn't get there on time, one of her brothers and sisters got it. Hey, I'm just out of luck or whatever, you know. But like I said, everything was family orientated at the time. So it was family. All I can say, the North End Family Center was a family, and we treated it that way. So all I can say is, you know, we were a family that stuck together, and like I said, that's basically what you had to deal with a family when you came through those doors or whatever.
Thank you, Gino. Thank you very much. And I would say you didn't do anything wrong.
No.
I think everybody here would agree.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that, Gino.
Thank you.
Next, we have Benjamin Holloway, who was the director
of the North End Family Center. And Mr. Holloway, before we get to what happened that night, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the North End Family Center and, you know, what it meant to the community.
This is not nice to talk about because it hurt more than you can imagine. But me and Sister Elizabeth, we was writing a Black Manifesto, which means that what we were doing, we was seeing how we as Black people can come together and do the things that we want to do. We was in what we call the red carpet room. And we was going to another spot to write up. Now, as we came out the door, Craig and Buck were sitting there. And what I do all the time to everybody there, I go to each one of them and I talk to them the same way I talk to my kids. You know, I treat them the same way. So I said, look, Craig, look, Buck, I got money. If you need money, I can give it to you. I give you whatever you want. I don't want you out here robbing nobody. I'm telling you now. So Mr. Holloway, don't even worry. We ain't gonna do none of that. We're gonna do the right thing. I say, he said, matter of fact, we get paid tomorrow. So we got money. You know, I said, now I'm telling you, you know, and like talking to Craig and Buck, I was talking to all of my drill team. We had what we would call a drill team, and it was set up by the nuns. We had army uniforms, and we had army boots, and what we did, we went in the community, and we cut the grass. We went to the store for the elderly. We did whatever they needed. We sat around and we talked to them. You know, this is what we did. You know, so we wasn't into none of this here. So me and Sister Elizabeth was writing and the phone rang. And it says that 2 white men shot Craig and Buck. Which was terrible because we wouldn't even consider nothing like this. So we rush in the car, we come back, and when we come back, the whole block was full of police. You know, we didn't know what had happened. This is the first time that I really heard what happened from Gino. Gino didn't tell me this. You know, I didn't even know he was in it. You know, so Billy Love, which was my security guard, he's the one that watches everything around there. He came and told us that this white man came down the street with a gas can and had money in his hand. You know, now I'm telling you the story that that it was told to me. This is the first time that I heard it from the horse's mouth. You know, so they told me that this police shot Buck, and Craig ran around the car, and he ran behind him and shot Buck. This is what I heard. Now, I knew everybody on the block, so I tried to go to the houses, but the police was everywhere. They wouldn't let you go to the house. And when I did get the opportunity to go to the house to ask, everybody was scared. I'm like, what you scared of? Tell me what happened. You know, everybody was scared to say anything. We didn't stop there. You know, I had a methadone clinic. I had 3,000 patients, 115 employees, and these people were mad. I mean, they wanted to kill white people. So we sat in a meeting, you know, it was about 40, 50 of us. So, hey, we're going to kill white people. I said, wait, hold it. How you going to do that? How many guns y'all got? We got one gun. How many bullets you got? We got one bullet. I don't think that's a good idea. I said, I tell you what, let's go and talk to the mayor. Let's see what, now right now, I don't know it was police. All I know was two white men. Now I did find out that it was a white man behind the fence. Nobody really said it was police. Of course, I was hard on everybody. I was hard to the point. I don't want y'all to do none of this here. We'll solve whatever problem that happened, we'll solve it, So it was, like I said, about 40 of us. We went down to talk to Gribbs, and he went a little off. But then we talked to Coleman Young. Coleman Young said, look, you let me, stress is gone the next day. The Big Four is gone the next day. I don't know whether y'all know what the Big Four was. What the Big Four was 4 police. If it's 7 or 8 of y'all, they'll jump out the car and whoop your butt for nothing. That's what they did to us. What I was doing was kind of keeping us from letting that happen to us, or else standing up for us, and we ain't got no guns, we ain't got nothing. But we're not going to let you come in here and do this to us. But Coleman Young stood up for us. There's another, Inspector Blunt, he stood up for us. It was a lot of single police that stood up for what we were doing, So we carried this on, and it, to me, it worked, We didn't fight. We didn't go after nobody. All we did was went to the mayor. We went to the certain people and asked them, and they gave us the help.
So, Mr. Holloway, in the immediate aftermath of the murders, you and Sister Elizabeth Harris and John Cosby organized a press conference.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I don't even remember. And I don't really remember because I was so angry and so mad at what was going down because I didn't want to fight nobody. And how do you fight? Well, where they fight? They got guns and all that stuff. And we talking about peace.
Yeah.
So it didn't really, matter of fact, I didn't even want to hear it.
You did find a way to fight, though.
Yeah. Well, we were North End Family Center. Then the main thing is that I had my own family that I didn't want to be in this fighting. So I wasn't only talking to the family center, I was talking to my family, because one of my sons, Charles, he could have been in it too. But he was lucky to go a different way. It's how that he got out of it. So I mean, as you start talking to the different ones, I don't know whether Supreme we can or not, but it seemed like it is because somebody helped us. Blessed Sacrament, the nuns, we was against them like mad, but they came in, they helped us. They listened to everything that we had to do, and then we had people like, I think his name was, look like that man right there.
That's Gregory Hicks over there.
There you go. That man there, man, he helped us in the community. Him and his wife too.
Or
You
you
know.
mean John Aldridge?
Yeah, John Aldridge. And his wife. They were good people that gave us the opportunity to let it go, but not kill nobody like what we want to do. So, but I ain't got over it yet. It every time that I had someone call me, I had to hang up.
Yeah.
Because to continue to talk about, you don't supposed to say hunkies.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, how these hunkies was treating us. you know, and it wasn't nice, you know, and we wanted to fight back, but we had a family center. We were here trying to get people to do the right thing, you know, and we did the right thing. We had all kind of people come through there, you know. There was nobody better than General Baker and Ken Cockrell.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, they was two of the greatest people I can think of, and Jim Ingram. He was another one, you know. He was one of them beautiful fighters, you know, that helped us, but Ken Cockrell, I can listen to him now, you know, and he could really run it, you know. And General Baker was right at his side, you know. So these are the kind of things that kept you going, you know, because they showed you they didn't hit nobody, they didn't fight, they used their mouth, and it worked. So we attempted to do the same thing, you know. I don't know how you got me to say all that.
So I just want to ask you a question about that, since you brought up Ken Cockrell and General Baker. Did they reach out to you? Did the
Huge, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. General Baker and Ken Cockrell, they was my best friends. I always sat down and talked to each one of them. And matter of fact, the police was scared of Ken Cockrell. You know, because when he opened his mouth, you know, I mean, let me tell you what he did. He called the judge a red-faced something, and they got him in contempt of court. He said, I'll prove it. They threw it out. He was one of the greatest persons that I know of, and General Baker was right beside him. If you saw Ken Cockrell, you saw General Baker. You know, so it kind of like made you feel good that you know there were some people out here, and Dan Arthur was there too. You know, him and his wife, because they had a youth program that we were in, that we went around to the community and we helped all of the community. That was his wife, you know, so we had an opportunity to not get a gun, not fight, you know, to come up with ourselves, you know, so, you know, I had with the Black Manifesto, which we wrote, you know, and my son was getting some copies of it, so I wasn't able to bring it, but I really wanted you to see the drill team, to see what they turn out to be. You know, I mean, we marched every day, and when we would march, the police used to follow us. And we would know because we had the black flag. And when we would see the police, we would dip. You know, and we would stand there and make them come out behind them doors and watch us. You know, so we did a lot of little things, you know, but we didn't fight. We got past that, you know, so I praise him because he was tough. And you get him to stop that was really something. And to get all of them to stop the fighting because they wanted to fight, they wanted to really get down. But we were able to not get down because I was lucky because I got a son by the name of, I think it's Benny Jr. You know, he was another good help because he was able to stop a lot of the stuff, you know, and then with Charles and Dwight and John and Liz and Yvette, Yvonne and Joyce, you know, I had my own little army, you know, but we wasn't an army of fighters, but we let you know if you want to.
It can happen.
Yeah, it can happen anytime that you throw a punch.
Yeah.
You know, so we live good. I enjoy myself. I'm enjoying here because that man over there was my idol. You know, because he was on the corner. He was our mayor. And anytime we go there and ask for something, he gave it to us. He helped us. He listened to us. You know, so we got by. Another thing, we had 115 people in the methadone clinic, and we took the money and we gave it to them. Everybody came, we gave it to them. We gave everybody something. And we helped everybody get away from being a drug addict. That was our purpose, and it worked.
So,
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Holloway, I want to ask you, the night of September 17th, I had read that there was a small demonstration right there on that night. Do you
Yeah.
remember about that?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think what really happened was that we were able to get over what you said, a funk, you know, because everybody wanted to hurt somebody, you know, but there is somebody you call Sister Elizabeth. She's really great, you know. And then there was 11 other nuns, and it was a Bishop Shaner, Father Duffy, Father Francis. They were able to let us let off the steam, but help us not to scare to the streets, which is what we wanted to do.
Mhm.
You know, so the main thing I said, it stopped us from really getting angry because we were really angry. We really wanted to hurt white people. You know, but I think this rally, what it did, it got us away from it. Crosby, I forgot all about him. He was a good writer, and he came in and he kind of like helped us too. Everybody, for some reason, at the family center started helping each other, and that's what we did. We reached and grabbed our own strength, and if there ever was a fight or something down there, I don't remember. You know, let me say this here: we were the only place that had Muhammad Ali and the Vonda feature fight in the community. You know, we had close to 1,000 people. Let me tell you what I did. The first 2 rows of seats, I left them vacant. And everybody then I went to the back door and got every crook out there and brought them in and put them up in the front. And they was able to see it free, didn't cost them nothing. And you know what happened? There was no robberies. There was no cars stolen. There was nothing happened that night. And that came from Inspector Blunt. He said, we never saw no thing like this where we had no problem whatsoever. The point I'm trying to make is that we were able to quiet down every time that something happens. We was able to quiet it down, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Holloway. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I'm- So I want to move to Dan Aldrich now, founder of the Black United Front, and he's going to give us his perspective on the anti-stress movement. And actually, Mr. Holloway just revealed something that I didn't know. I had no idea that that he had a relationship with Mr. Aldrich. So that's news to me. Mr. Aldrich.
Yes, I've known Benny a very long time. My issues with the police evolved before stress. Mine began in September of 1969 when a young man on Parker Street was killed by the police. It was said that they shot him, 2 of them shot him because they were threatened by him. Now, this young man's named Chucky Howell. He was 13 years old. But what they did reveal was he was the size of a 9-year-old. He had one leg shorter than the other, and he was also blind in one eye. So 2 police, both who were over at least 6 feet tall, 2 and 200 pounds, because being these special squads, they had a height and weight requirement. So you had to be a certain size. So there was no way. I was working at the youth center up on Mack and Sheridan, and I heard what had happened to him. So I went down on Parker Street and interviewed his family and many of the folk who lived around there, and found out that he'd been murdered by them. I then took that case, or the issue, down and brought it to city council and everywhere else that I could. The result is that nothing was done about this particular murder, but that I was able to start something called the Chucky Howell Health Center, which was the Region 8 drug abuse program, and I named it after him. It was interesting, the young man today told me that he did not know, or he could not find altogether about Chucky Howell. But this was started and funded by the Board of Education. It was called the Region 8 Drug Abuse Program. And it was all renamed by me as the Chucky Howell Health Center. So I organized the staff, and what we did was to try to deal with drug abuse in the neighborhood. So we predated stress. But I had known, I'm originally from New York City, so I had known through friends here in the city how police operated here. So it wasn't I was ignorant of the situation, but I was informed by many friends. Ken Cockerell and my wife grew up together. General Baker and my wife grew up together. They grew up on the same block in Southwest Detroit. She grew up with Kenny Cockerell out in Royal Oak Township. So they'd known each other since they were basic kids, very young. So that much of what I knew about Detroit, I learned in part through her relationship with people that she had known for many years. So I fought for years to try to get some kind of justice for Chucky Howell. That never did come to pass. I had many other experiences with police, some that almost ended in my own personal death. But so if you were in the movement at that time, many of us had many experiences with police. Police brutality, false accusations. So that much of my activity came from the fact that I was falsely accused of a number of activities in which there were attempts to press charges against us, and attempts at shootings. So, and we had one person who was killed. He was with the Republic of New Africa. But so, many of us I've had numerous contacts with the Detroit Police Department as well as threats. So, I don't know where we want to go with this, but my first encounter was when Chucky Howell was killed. And he was a young man who was obviously in no condition to fight police or anyone else.
So it's my understanding that from witness accounts in the Chucky Howell case, that he was a bystander, that the police had just, he wasn't doing anything. They just picked him and he got shot.
Yeah, well, he was more than a bystander in this sense. He was cutting through his yard. If anyone knows anything about the houses over on Parker and Kercheval, these houses are very close together. So he was just coming out of his house and going in the alleyway which separated his house from the house which was next door, and the police and got shot. So that, I don't even think that's a bystander, maybe. But I'm saying he was not involved in anything. He was a 13-year-old who looked like a 9-year-old, who basically was in extremely poor health, short leg, blind in one eye. He was not the kind of person that would be involved in any kind of negative activity. All he was doing was walking between his house and the house next door.
And so, you remember Serious Business?
Serious Business was a column that I wrote for the Michigan Chronicle, sure.
Yeah. And so, you used that platform to talk about the Chucky Howell case.
Yes.
And I was looking through the archive, and I found an anonymous letter from a cop criticizing you for calling it like it was in the Chucky Howell case.
Yes.
Was there a lot of pushback on that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there were lots of pushbacks. After that, I became, in some ways, a target, for the police. I was accused. My daughter did not want me to mention this, but it's a fact. I was accused of both murder and arson. I was supposed to try to kill the man on Oakland, and it says house on fire. Later, I was also accused of trying to set the Phelps Lounge on Oakland on fire. None of that was true, but the police put out an all points bulletin for my arrest that I was armed and dangerous, and which was not true. And it was an interesting kind of thing. I got a call from a friend. He said, I got something here that says that, you just committed a crime on Oak Men Boulevard, and that police has all points bulletin out for you, and they said you were armed and dangerous. Well, so I tried to figure out what to do. I said, how can I get out of this? There was a fellow who was a commander who I played basketball with. So I called him. I said, look, man, I'm in trouble. The police officer is looking for me and Lonnie P. They said we were both doing this together. If anybody knows Lonnie, there was no possibility of anything remotely like that happening. But anyway, me either. But so what they decided, so I said, we've got to get out of here. We cannot stay in the same place where we live. So I lived on Fullerton, Lonnie lived on Cortland. I went and got him and said, we got to get out of here. I then called my friend, who was Al Dunmore, who was editor of the Michigan Chronicle, and explained the situation to him. He said, here's what we're going to do. So we evolved a scheme where Lonnie and I would come to his house for a meeting. We would meet with him. We would meet with the Robert Tyndall, who was on the city council. We would meet with George Crockett, and we would meet with the attorney. I forget his name right now. And so we called the meeting. We would go to the meeting, and when we got to the meeting, we would call the police and tell them that we were there. So we called the police, and before long, the police came and had the place surrounded. And they said they were looking for me, and Judge Crockett answered the door. He said, yes, he's right here. We'd like to see him. He said, that's fine. He said, but I have to see a warrant. If we don't have a warrant, he said, well, you cannot see him unless you get a warrant. So he asked for the warrant. He asked the names of all the officers, and he said he wanted the warrant. So they said, we're going to get the warrant and going to come back here and pick Mr. Aldridge up. He said, fine, he'll be right here. To this day, no one has ever come back with the warrant. So this was the way they would do. The police would organize hits. In other words, fake situations where you think something was going on, and then you respond to because the police tell you respond, and the next thing you know, if I'd got that car and gone off with the police, I would have never seen them or any of that. The same thing happened with Phelps Lounge. The truth is that I was with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We were trying to raise money for SNCC. James Brown was performing that night. So after we finished the concert, we were going to give the money to SNCC. And Eddie Phelps, who ran the Phelps Lounge, told me that he wasn't going to give us any money, even though that was his initial promise. Well, I was a different person than I was now. So to tell me that you weren't going to give me any money, that you had promised me that so-and-so had a response. So I told him, I'll tell you what we do. Let's go out in the back of the shop, the bar, and let's talk about this money. He said no. So next thing I knew, we left there, and the next day, someone brought us a plan that what we were going to do is to, go to Phelps, burn Phelps down, and deal with whoever somebody weren't going to pay. So I said to myself, that sounds like a setup to me. And there was one fellow who came, who I thought, was an agent. At that time, we had a lot of stuff. People accused people of being agents. So, so we had some faults. And the reason I felt that way, because he says, He says, I'm in town. I said, oh. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm working with Dorothy Dewberry. He said, do you know her? I said, yes, I know her. He said, when's the last time you saw her? I said, well, I saw her this morning. I thought everybody knew that Dorothy Dewberry was Dorothy Dewberry Aldrich, but he was somebody who didn't know that. And he's talking to me, and he's looking for Dorothy Dewberry. So I said, oh, no, I'm not faulting this guy. So he said, I got the weapons, I got everything you need, bim, bam, bam. So I talked to Lonnie. I said, Lonnie, let me tell you something. You and I are not going anywhere near that. And so what happened, Lonnie came with me, and the next day, they went to ostensibly blow up Phelps Lounge. They arrested everyone in the place, took everyone down, arrested everyone. But when they came, they would say, where's Dan Aldrich? Well, he's not here. So they dropped charges against everyone, and no one's ever discussed this case again. It just disappeared. So these kinds of things happen on a regular basis. Just one more quick case. I ran for I guess county commissioner against a fellow named I forget his mother had been the county commissioner. So I ran against him, and I didn't beat him, but I got enough votes so that he couldn't win. So he accused me of breaking into the commissioner's office and stealing the records. And I said I didn't steal anything. So they got one of the guys, Frank from the Republic of New Africa, who testified against me. Said he saw me in there. I said, it's not possible. So anyway, they had a trial. And the first trial they had, the person was, some of you know the woman judge who was so tough on people, Geraldine Bledsoe Ford. When I saw her, I was smart enough, I just passed out in the court. So they took me to court. The guy said, when you getting them? I said, when you give me somebody else. So they got me Judge Crockett. Crockett called the case. He said the state of Michigan versus Danny. That sound good. People call me Danny. When he said the state of Michigan versus Danny, I said, that sounds right. So we had the case, and I had two attorneys. I had Milton Henry, and I had Longworth Quinn Jr. And when they finished with the people there, they decided that I was obviously it was false, but they had planned to something. But there were a lot of trumped up charges against people who were in the movement. I mean, a lot of phony, unusual things. I've had at least 3 cases that we had good attorneys. The case just disappeared. No one's ever been charged. No one's ever been accused. I don't have any record. There's nothing. And they gave me initially on the first case, but on that one, fingerprints. They gave me fingerprints back, apologize, all that kind of stuff. But these are the kinds of things that Detroit police set people up. They did not just kill people, but they set you up in court. The other thing is when you went to court, one of the things they would do is like we go to court, and when you come into court, they fill up every seat in the place. You can imagine for a young person wanting to testify, and every seat in the courtroom is filled, which was intimidating and frightening. But also one of the advantages that I had is I had friends, once again, like Ken Cockrell, who knew the legal system well, or Justin Rabbits, and so I would ask them questions, and so I was prepared for these situations. But I'm saying what was never, because we talk about people shooting people, but we don't talk about the false people who've been arrested, who've been put in jail, who phony charges are against. If I had not been, in my own mind, as slick as I was, there was no possibility I would have not either done time or shot. In fact, so much so, just one final thing. On the Algiers Motel case, Lonnie Peake and I hid the witnesses. And they were looking for the witnesses because they were the only witnesses to the actual shootings. And I found them because my wife's friend was the mother of Carl Cooper, one of the boys who got killed. So we got the witnesses together, and we hid them so the police couldn't get them before they testified. And the usual thing about that case is that when they testified, they were convicted temporarily, but then they moved the case to Mason, Michigan. They moved to Mason, Michigan, then they were exonerated. But one of the things we laugh about, we're walking down the street, that was on Euclid, I never forget in my life, on Euclid, and I tell Lonnie, I said, Lonnie, there's 4 men in a car, 4 white men in dress clothes. I said, those must be the police trying to get us. Lonnie says to me, man, you're always paranoid about something. So at the time, I was on the track team in Tennessee State. So I said, I'm gonna tell you what, I'm gonna hit this corner and I'll meet you later. The truth is, I hit that corner so fast when I turned the corner, I always laugh. I say, my joke was, I was so low to the ground, I had to scoop the sand out of my pocket to maintain my balance. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff you had to deal with. You always had to deal with the police doing something. We were fortunate enough, some of us, to escape, and some folk didn't, and some folk were on the edge of criminality. When you were dealing with stress, you placed themselves in jeopardy. The first person I heard talk about stress a lot was Ken Cocker, because I didn't pay a lot of attention, to stress. We had our own issue with police, but we didn't know but Kenny knew both the police system and the legal system, so he had, more intimate knowledge about that kind of thing than me. He certainly had more knowledge about that than I did. But yes, having contact with the police was something that those of us in the movement had on a regular basis, some of which was never recorded, because when you got away, sometime you were so glad. Like I used to wear a straw hat. It had a hole in the middle of it, and it just symbolizes with the police, you almost made it, you know what I mean? So we would we taunted and teased them as much as, to show our absolute lack of fear. But most of us who dealt with police had multiple incidents of either being almost shot or being trumped up. And I can't tell you the number of people I know who are now, I got a friend now, he's doing about 45 years. He in prison right now. He went in when he was about 18 years old. And so he's now, I know he's in his 70s now, because he's younger than I am, and I'll be 80. But he's doing. I've been trying to get him out. We've been in correspondence. I've been trying to get him out of prison for 45 years. I've never lost contact with him. We used to be head of the Bay family in prison. His name is Leatherwood Bay, so people know him because he was head of the Bay family up at Jackson. But so the police in this town, were treacherous, and did everything from shooting people to setting people up. All of us who, as have been involved, have had some kind of negative encounter with police.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan Aldridge. So next we're going to hear from Gregory Hicks, who worked with Ken Cockrell to organize the Labor Defense Coalition and the State of Emergency Committee. Mr. Hicks?
Thank you, and thank everyone who decided to attend either here today or, as I understand, this is being broadcast. I want to first of all say a couple of things. Yeah, I want to first of all say a couple of things. One is that each one of the persons who have talked thematically touched on some environmental kinds of things in which everybody was operating at that time. And I don't think that where it's good for us and necessary for us to tell stories because people live these things. Stories should not necessarily give way to the systematic things that were occurring during that period of time, which really is the common thread between all of the stories themselves. You know, clearly the police in the city of Detroit had a history of, and continue to be, as they are today, a force of occupation that tends to try and mitigate on the side of, you know, if you're talking theoretically and all that stuff, on the side of capital, trying to mitigate things so that essentially capital wins, you know, corporate interest wins, so on and so forth. So that's a consistent theme and role that occurs in our society. At the same time, when I heard Benny, for example, and the other brother talk about the experience at the Northwest Activity Center, some of this, if you listen to the voices, there's a certain amount of guilt that people carry. And the guilt is that maybe we did something wrong, you know, and I think that's another theme. It's bullshit. We didn't do anything wrong. These people, police officers were, I mean, they didn't just show up that night. They were organized and dispatched and trained over long periods of time in order to do what they did. In fact, when it's all said and done, the defense that was put by some of these officers when they were charged in situations was, well, shit, that's what they told me to do. I was trained to do this. You know, I mean, that was, you know, so these are not situations where shit just happens out on the street. I mean, these are systematic occurrences that have a logical outcome based on the kind of priorities that we have in our society. So, I mean, want to bear that in mind. Also, bear in mind, and again, we go back to some of the experiences of Northwest Activity Center, Northwest Family Center, North End Family Center, is that part of this was a community responding to an epidemic in drugs. You know, I mean, they had a methadone center over there, and the methadone center just wasn't sitting there just for the hell of it. You know, methadone was an alternative treatment to an influx of some heavy-ass narcotics, you know, into our community. And those narcotics were not designed to just, you know, for us to like just have a good day. I mean, you know, they were designed to decimate the community in which these things were being dumped in. You know, at the same time, we saw increases in terms of guns, all of this kind of stuff. So our community, if you will, and I'm not saying the African-American community is the only community that this happens to, but we were essentially, and continue today, to be a laboratory in which capital uses to push the limits on how much, quite frankly, they can exploit, what they can do in order to, you know, in effect, put people in a position where people have no alternative but to respond in certain ways. It's in that connection that we began to see the anti-stress movement develop. I mean, it didn't develop out of a vacuum. Ricardo Buck and Craig Mitchell weren't the first to be hit on the streets in the fashion and entrapped and so forth. There were, back in those days, there were even shootouts between police officers. You know, I mean, all kinds of things in that regard. So this anti-stress movement essentially represents the culmination of a whole series of activity, some of it very personal and individual, with people having encounters on the street with the Big Four and into the stress era and all of this kind of stuff. What we had, though, that was, I think, to Detroit's credit, we had a very vibrant community of social activists. And those activists, and Benny, Ms. Holloway was part of that. There were other people who were part of it. Dan was part of that. But these social activists essentially said, enough is enough. You just can't continue to do this to us. And so Ken got together with a number of people, created a united front in the city of Detroit, and Ken called for a state of emergency to be called. And during that state of emergency, we went throughout the community organizing for a major march because in those days, it was necessary. When you think of the way the police operated, and I'm reminded what Dan was saying, like Dan was set up, or would have been set up had he made it that evening. Well, that kind of individual targeting of activists and so forth was very much part of all of that was occurring in the city at that time. So Kenny's logic is, generally speaking, was you can't arrest 10,000 people. So the state of emergency march was designed to mobilize some 10,000 people in order to march down in unison and say, enough was enough in that regard. We also noticed that once we put people in the street, as organizers tend to do, you had to sustain this thing a little bit because, have a pretty big march on Saturday. But, Sunday comes around, so what you gonna do? The logic out of this experience was for us to start a petition drive. And this petition drive was to further, as an organizing tool, to have people sign a petition and say they were opposed to stress and that stress needed to be abolished. And during this period of time, a lot of other things were like coming together. We had a municipal election that was coming up, and we had some real interesting things occurring in the municipal election. Obviously, the long and short of it is that Coleman Young, who pledged to abolish stress, wins the favor, the large majority favor of the African American community. But one of the other little things that is not often, or at least is forgotten, Kenny and a group of progressive attorneys in town actually filed a lawsuit against the stress unit. And much of the documentation we have in terms of what stress was doing is contained in that lawsuit. This lawsuit was convened in front of Judge Edward Bell. Judge Bell was a black jurist who, probably had the same aspirations that all of these folks had. But by blind draw, he gets the stress lawsuit. I was an investigator in the firm at the time. We probably had maybe something like 8 to 10 days of testimony in front of the judge, where we went over individual incidents of where stress had acted lawlessly, murdered people, and so on and so forth. Well, in the state of Michigan, there was a law that said if you were going to run for mayor, you had to kind of like, I don't know if you had to be a private citizen or something like that for a year out and so forth. It was something like that. Well, Judge Bell had an interest in running for mayor. So in the middle of the doggone campaign, he halts the trial. In the middle of the trial, he halts the trial. And so we never came to the end of that particular trial because what we were asking for in the lawsuit was for stress to be dismantled, for people to be compensated for some of the things that had occurred to them during this period of time and so forth. So we want to underscore here that because everybody, there were better than 10,000 people who marched in the state of emergency march. A variety of them had different reasons and different rationale in connection with that. In addition to that activity, this kind of leads us, this is kind of like the precursor to African American political empowerment in town. Had it not been for, well, let me put it this way. Even if Judge Bell had said that he was going to abolish stress, okay, he may have gotten elected, So, there's a way in which one, and I have tremendous respect for the late Coleman A. Young. But I do know that times were such that had it been Dan Aldrich running, and Dan said that he was going to abolish stress and said it convincingly, we would have elected Dan. It was a time in the community where this event, this historic event, was going to take place. And it was largely because of really several generations of community activism, resistance on the part of people, ranging from individual kind of resistance up to organizational levels of resistance. And I don't want us to kind of like miss that point, because if we even look today in terms of what's occurring with police and so forth, right? Folks don't have to go back and start from ground one. I mean, the reason why we're telling these stories is for people to pick up these lessons, and to pick up these lessons in such a way that they can push the envelope further, push the struggle further and so forth. And I think that the critical thing was we were very aware of the environment in which we lived. We worked with people in their individual communities who were trying to deal with whatever their specialties were. Fighting against narcotics, fighting against police brutality, fighting against bogus education, so on and so forth. Wherever they were, we basically created the United Front. And when I say we, that's a real charitable we here, But the United Front was created, and I think this was one of the few times, at least in our modern history, where that United Front activity had the ability to kind of like just pull everybody into an umbrella. And it was largely because of the corruption of the police department and the just straight up abuse and blunt force that they used in every encounter. We used to have a thing in which we would say, in spite of Dan Aldrich's eloquence as a speaker and so on and so forth, and Dan would go to the block and he would win a couple of folks over on the revolution. But shit, the police in the next block for the shit that they did won us 2,000 or 3,000 more people, I mean, they did more because of their stuff, to organize the community than we did. And I think that people have to really kind of like just recognize that reality, and recognize, however, as conscious organizers, though, we have to kind of mold that in some way that we can deliver some kind of positive result under the set of conditions. In this case, the positive result was the abolishment of stress. And that meant something to people, to abolish stress and then usher in a period of African-American empowerment in the city of Detroit. I hope that we don't forget that at one point we did have a considerable amount of African-American empowerment in Detroit. It's not that clear today that that exists, but at some point I hope people learn from those types of things. That's essentially what I wanted to try and do in terms of talking. If people have specific questions about how the campaign was organized, or want to spend some time on specific incidents and dates and all that stuff, we can do that. But I think that we need to kind of look at this thing in its overarching way. We're storytellers, but we're storytellers because the conditions gave us individual stories, and we're organizers because the conditions allowed us to pull things together in a united front. And that's what we need today.
Well, certainly, I agree with much of what Greg has said. To me, we had the Black United Front. If you get a backward picture of the South End magazine, in which I was leading the communication there. It was huge. I mean, with so many people, it was practically all of downtown. Now, the other thing that happened under that I think was important, that I think many of us met privately with each other to try to resolve issues between us. Because I remember Ed Bell was going to run for mayor. In fact, he did run for mayor. So I remember Lonnie Peake trying to convince me to work for Coleman Young. Frankly, I didn't think much of Coleman Young at all. So I remember him taking me up to Coleman Young's apartment. I never forget, he lived at 248 East Forest Street on the second floor, trying to explain why he should be mayor. I was not the least bit impressed at all at that time, because I didn't think any of the people running for mayor was such that I wanted to spend any energy on time with. One of the things about that period I think I regret is that we did a lot of stuff amongst each other, which is part of what Greg is talking about. But I wish there were ways in which we now could have seen that we were all pretty much on the same side, even in the midst of our differences, and we would have tried to have worked together more. I certainly regret the fact that my group did not work more with the Negro Revolutionary Black Workers, though we knew individual people and individual friends, like John Williams and I were very close. We could have worked better as a group together. And too much to me, we saw each other more sometime in opposition to each other. And there were many differences that we had that, looking back now, I think we could have been stronger as a movement. Although I do agree with the fact of the police were the primary organizers. We could have worked better as a movement had we intentionally worked more together. And we saw differences between each other which actually did not exist. I mean, did not really exist, that we began to appreciate later. And so that's a regret that I really have. I think others could have done more, and I believe I certainly could have done more for us to work more closely together.
Thank you, Dan. So I have some questions before we get to the Q&A. For Mr. Hicks, can you walk us through a little bit about what it was like to put together the State of Emergency Committee? Because you have this broad-based coalition of left to liberal organizations, and I also know that some more organizations like the Black Urban League, or the Urban League, didn't come along till later. Can you talk about that process for just a moment?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. That process is not that different from a process if you started it off today. I mean, in the beginning, there's a small number of people who obviously recognize that certain types of things need to be done. That small group of people tend to try and organize the resources in order to put the word out there and influence other people to do things or to come of common mind. There were a number of organizations that were not part of the state of emergency march at the beginning, and there were still even some that didn't join it at the end, for that matter. Okay. Dan described a situation where what the dynamic was for the organizations was for us to kind of get over these petty differences, okay? And United Front activity does allow for that type of thing, and that's one of the good things. But I would be the first to say to you, the vast majority of people who are in the streets and operating in that anti-stress activity that lasted a couple of years, okay, were not these organizations. These were people. These were common and everyday people who were sitting on the bus line, and the police came over there and slapped them upside their head and, and dared them to have a reaction. I mean, these were people who were workers who were trying to just simply get to work, recognizing they got to, make a deadline. So then maybe they kind of sped up a little bit, who the police pulled over and fucked them over, and they lost that shift, possibly lost their job and all that kind of stuff. These were people who got angry out of the day-to-day interactions they were having with our society. These were also the people who were attempting to live the American dream, who were buying houses on land contract. And then all of a sudden, they missed a payment, and likely a white landlord comes in and puts them out and says, look here, the money that you've been giving me for the last 15 years, thanks. You don't get no equity in this. In fact, I want your ass out by 3 o'clock. Those people got angry as a result of that. So this whole question of what people saw out here was the culmination of the way in which we all were being treated in our respective areas. Because you can't just limit this just the police were dogs. Pretty much, almost all of our existence, there were dogs in almost every area in which we operated or existed in. And we got the short end of the stick, though. So I really want to just emphasize where there was clearly brilliant people who initiated and organized and facilitated and pushed these things. The numbers begin to mount as people just begin to personally identify that shit is not happening for me. That this stuff is about as, rude or is about as dangerous as they come. And the state of emergency march became a way for them to give their voice. And the election of Mayor Young later came a way for them to give their voice. And occasionally there have been times in our history where basically that's what people were doing. And again, I don't take away from I tried to resist telling a story, but the way in which I met Ken Cockrell, for example, because everybody gave a little story. The way I met Ken Cockrell, I was in high school. I was a member of an organization that was, in effect, was the youth component of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, called the Black Student United Front. We had a student strike. I think some stuff, I was at Cooley High School at the time. We had a student strike. We closed the school down for a couple of days. We were coming back, I think on a Monday or something like that from over the weekend. It was like necessary for us to put our face in since we kind of lost some time over the weekend. We pull up in front of the school, and there are about 50 squad cars who come out, and they arrested me, and they charged me with murder. Now, I may have murdered an exam from time to time. I might have even been murdered on a basketball court occasionally, but I didn't kill nobody. So we go down to the 12th, there was Schaefer Station at this time. And fortunately, through the connections with the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, Kenny goes down to the station and demands that they, cut me loose. And he ran a writ of habeas corpus at that time. And the next thing I know, I'm out. And he had my fingerprints returned to me and all this kind of stuff too. So during that period of time, shit, I'm with Ken Cockrell on whatever the fuck he has to say. And Ken introduced us, because we were also, there's another person in this that needs some mention, there's a guy by the name of Larry Nevels. And Larry Nevels was organizing in the northwest section of the city of Detroit, where there was an organization called Unicom, and we were fighting against the University of Detroit because they had all these resources and they didn't want to share anything with the community. In fact, they had a plan to build a fence around the entire university. Well, no, this was the fence. No, this was the fence that they built around the university to keep us from going onto the campus. University of Detroit, on the 6 Mile and Livernois. Now, as you all who are Detroiters know, they completed that fence. That fence is still up, is up there now. You know, it takes them a little time to get their agendas all up there, but they hang in there on stuff. But in that situation, the league and other organizations, because I'm not going to just credit the league, were involved in so many encounters trying to resist, if you will, and people were trying to do their level-head best to just deal with the critical conditions that were confronting them and to make some rational sense to it and offer up an alternative. And that's essentially, what was going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That one that is organizing, but there are things happening every day to individual people, and that they're being brought into the movement even sometime when they oppose it. You know what I mean? The situation. My grandmother, my mother-in-law or my grandmother-in-law was late with her mortgage payment. And a guy called her and said essentially, bitch, you better get my money. And my total head blew off. I literally ran down on the street down and just bust into the office, just half out of my mind. And at that time, what they would do, when they call you, they would use another name. The person would not call you and use the name Mr. So-and-so call. They would use another name. I went to earlier, sat in office, and just waited, and to see who used that name. And when I saw that name come up, I was off to the races. But what I'm saying is, lots of people here at the time had lots of all kinds of things. You could have been stopped by the police. You could have been pulled off the bus. Anything could have happened to you that helped to bring other people into your fold. And when you talk about killing people, because stress killed people, then there's nothing to mobilize you like having someone in your family killed. For example, I told you, Carl Cooper was the son of my wife's friend, and I mean he was shot down when they held him at the Algiers up against the wall and just shot him with the shotgun, blowing off his arms and his testicles. I'm saying the aspects of that case have not even been revealed to today in terms of what actually happened in those cases. So what I'm saying is that I agree totally with Greg that the number of incidents just helped to mobilize your audience for you. People came in, because while those of us in the movement did some stuff, the circumstances were mobilizing people faster than we could, frankly. And tons of folk had something to say. Ed Bell, by the way, did run for mayor. And lost.
As he should.
So now I'd like to open it up for any questions from the audience. I have a few myself, but if you have a question.
Been activist since the 50s. She was also one of the ones who started the Northern Student Movement walkout in 1966. She organized the Youth NAACP in the 1950s. She was also part of the Algiers motel case, because when we went to interview the families to get the evidence, there were 4 people involved. There was my wife, Ken Cockrell, who she grew up with, Lonnie Pink, and myself. We interviewed the family members of the people, of all the boys who were killed, largely led by Kenny, who was the attorney. I think it was his first year in law school, and we interviewed the families to get the information to then in turn against the police. She was active. Marion Kramer, who's here, was very active. I know the two of them were active. And who works with Marion? You know what I'm talking about. Maureen Taylor was very active. So the three of my wife, Gloria House was active. She was active later because she had to come here she came, from Alabama as part of the SNCC thing, just like me. I came here after school in 1966. So some of us came later. But yeah, those women were involved. Grace Boggs was involved. She was a woman involved. I would also argue that Benny's wife was involved, because I would go to his house. She was very much involved in whatever was going on. Usually, if you were involved with a woman, the women we were involved in were also involved in the movement. It's like we talk about Dr. King, no one ever mentions Coretta Scott King. As I tell you, when they set his house on fire, her house was set on fire too. So, but we often omit that from the conversation. But I do know that Dorothy Dewberry Aldridge, Marion Kramer, Maureen Taylor, Gloria House, I do know that those persons were Beulah Holloway. I just didn't know her name. Didn't remember.
I just want to add one other thing on that. I mean, and unfortunately, time doesn't permit for us to raise the names of any number of people who've been involved in this. But my general impression, even though Dan named a few individuals, what was characteristic of that time is that there were men and women in all of these organizations and all of these efforts. Men because of their own machismo may have been further out front. Maybe even the press might have been more receptive to taking the man's leadership and so forth and projecting that. But to suggest that women, it's kind of like the church. I don't know of any church that runs where the sisters are really in control of that church. The sisters make the determinations on how things are going to get done. Now, you might have a preacher up there, okay? But you're talking about, this is pretty much representative, I think, of varying periods, at least coming in the African-American community, where men and women were involved. Clearly, they had different responsibilities. Some of those responsibilities are interpreted in time to be more, let's say, chauvinistic on the part of men than others. There were also, during that period of time, both black folks and white folks. There were Hispanic folks and so forth who were also involved in this time. The time in which we're essentially talking about probably reflects one of, aside from the general labor movement, one of the times where all segments of our community showed up and operated and did their thing in order to bring about the kind of results, And I would hope, again, the role we're playing today is kind of like storytellers. And I hope that more storytelling is taking place. And I do hope that we take the time to identify women in connection with the struggle in which men tend to talk about more readily. And I will say, just as a personal note, Marion Kramer, who Marion was back there, I don't know if she's still sitting over here. Marion was one of the black females who came up and assisted us over at Unicom, the organizing effort I described before. And we did a variety of things in Unicom. We even, back in those days, organized and I know this one was never on tape, but concerts. We brought Isaac Hayes to town, for example, and in those days, Isaac Hayes was, he was the man, okay, right? Marion and other women, and women tended to bring a certain amount of technical capacity and knowledge that some of us brothers just didn't have, okay? And so there were differences in terms of the roles that people played. I would argue, in retrospect, all of them were equally important, but the men tends to be put out there as being it. And I would be the first to say, recognize and give credence to the women who were substantially part of that. And I would say that would be true in terms of multiracial communities as well. Okay.
And I would just say too that we did try in earnest to have a woman on this panel, because we recognized that women were critical in this movement, particularly the movement that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to give an opportunity to Mr. Holloway to talk about Mrs. Holloway for just a moment, since we're on the subject.
That's not easy. Because then we always thought that we were doing everything. But when you look at it, it wasn't us. Now I can say that now, and that's not nice to say now because she's dead now. I should have been able to say this when she was alive. Because everything I got came from her. I just deliver it. But she'll come back there and point that finger, and she's telling the truth. You don't want to admit it, but yes, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. I love her more than anything, Wish she hadn't divorced me, but she did. One thing she did, I had stuff from everybody. I had this room full of trophies. I got a thing in my pocket and I can tell it came from the president. And you know what she told me? You ain't nothing, you ain't did nothing. And she told me the truth because everything I did came from her. Like I could go to Dan. Dan could say whatever he wanted, but I'm going to tell you, I know his wife. She was the most brilliant woman I ever knew. And I mean it. So these women, they taking the back seat. I don't know why. Because they are really the greatest thing that ever happened to us men folks.
One reason I mentioned your wife is because I used to go to the house.
Yeah.
And first of all, I thought you had 1,000 children. I'm a guy raised just me and my brother, right? I come in your living room, man. There's like 1,000 Negroes trying to eat, trying to do everything in the house. You going out the door. She said, "Where you go?" I got, well, so-and-so called. You got all of them. I say, man, so she had to manage both movement activities and trying to maintain this household, which was demanding, which was tremendously demanding. You were starting all kinds of new projects. I would teach you. You every day you had a new project. The one I remember is spirulina. This Negro wanted to sell so much spirulina. You're going to do the world with spirulina. And but all those things involved, and the reason you could be outside the house, because you had someone maintain a sense of order and direction inside the house. Otherwise, you could have been outside the house. I mean, it's like with me. One reason I was able to be active in so many different ways is because I had Dorothy always take, with the movement, take care of business. Remember, before me, she was the director of the Detroit Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so I'm saying a lot of times, we all work together, and on projects. It's like, being from New York, I see now fights between native-born blacks, people from the Caribbean, and Puerto Ricans. Well, growing up in New York,
We were all one. I was in the group. My main partner, we had a room, partner with Felipe Luciano. We always hang out together. When Frankie Lyman did the song Why Do Fools Fall in Love, the bass Sherman was his cousin, but the other three guys were 3 black Puerto Ricans. I'm just saying that a lot of times we don't deal with the kind of intersectionalism. There's always been, like here, we talk about whites and blacks. Well, Frank Joyce was one of the people against racism. And they were organizing tons of white people as many as they could. You know what I mean? So at some point, we have to deal with the kind of intersectionalism that has always been a part of the movement, even when it wasn't done as well as it could be done. You know.
Well, can I say one other thing? 'Cause I am thankful for this, however. In this last round of political activism, essentially around Black Lives Matter, I'm glad some of them white folks showed up. I'm telling you, I'm glad some of them showed up, because the kind of way in which the police traditionally moves against the African American community, with the amount of force that it brings in order to close us down, it was actually pretty good to see some of the folks who didn't look like me out there on the lines. And you did also then see not a substantial difference in the way in which police operated, but they wasn't shooting people down in the same way they would have had those marches been 100% African American.
One white woman got shot, and one got run over.
Yeah.
One white woman got shot, right? The policeman shot the woman coming in, and one got run over in Charlottesville, and those were big deals, which they were. But if 2 black women had the same thing, we wouldn't even discuss it.
We would know about
We would. That's more than that. We wouldn't know about it. So I'm just saying, it does make a difference when all of us are involved, when all of us have to put some money, put something in the game. It matters and it changes. And the truth is that white Americans, for the most part, are not demonstrated that they're prepared to shoot white men and women down the way they shoot other people down. There's no demonstration of that at any time in history, no matter what happened. Here we had people taking over the Capitol. Can you imagine if a bunch of us have been trying to take over the Capitol? You know how much blood would have flowed? So I'm just saying, it makes a difference. And at some point, this is emerging slowly into being a more American struggle. Not a total American struggle, but more people who are not black and not brown are beginning to see this thing firsthand, because sometimes those persons never had the experience to see that. You know, you don't have that experience. And once you see it up close, then you begin to understand, I think, better.
But we have yet to know how long this kind of consciousness is going to still be upper front in the minds of white folks.
We don't know. It's like Reconstruction. Yeah. We don't know how long it's going to last.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions from the audience? Do you want to come up here, Peter?
All right, thank you all. Mr. Hicks, you were mentioning how conditions-free responses, how the actions of police more than anything are going to bring people into the streets more so than the actions of organizers. So I wanted to bring that to Mr. Fortune and ask, how did you respond to the killing of your family members, of your friends? What were your moves after that, beyond healing and recovering from that action?
I'd be lying if I say I didn't hate white people. I'm not gonna sit there and say, hey. But then again, as you get into religion, you realize that, hey, it's not a black it's not about black and white. It's about what God's allow, you know. God allowed my mother, you know, or he allowed things to happen. And spirituality basically took my racism away from me because it's only one God, and that's the one that we all serve. And I went along with his decision. His decision was for those people to go. So, like I say, I lost my prejudice with my spirituality. That's what took it away from me. You know, right now, I don't have it. Thanks.
And so I want to again thank our panel for joining us. Oh, you got a question, Brian?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. So you mentioned that it was, you know, the pressures of the circumstances that brought people out and organized and mobilized people more than the work you could do. I wonder if that also applied to getting a united front together, or if that took more of like the individual, you know, organization, person to person work, or if it was the circumstances that allow people to coalesce.
Yeah. Let me see if I can respond to this. Use a slightly different example. Everybody know, what was it, 10 years ago, the Wall Street, what was it, Occupy Wall Street movement occurred, okay, right? And it, obviously, what people were responding to was the economic conditions in the country, and everybody was fucked up, and that's what we coined the 99% to the 1% and so forth, okay? One of the fatalities coming out of that particular movement, of course, is that they said, we're a movement without a cause. We're a movement without leaders. We're a movement with, we're just simply responding to the conditions. And it is clear, you can see in that illustration, where that movement was responsible for, the conditions were responsible for amassing people on the streets. The difference, however, in that and some of the experience in which people were talking about, is that there was a conscious group of individuals, and they didn't all start at the same day with the same levels of consciousness, but they essentially became organizers. Those organizers gave definition to and a description to those conditions. Those organizers met with each other, in some cases called for truce, in some cases recognized that some people were good in mobilizing community X versus community Y and so forth. So there was a wide level of collaboration, and that's under that context, the more formal state of emergency committee emerges. And as I said earlier, everybody didn't join, but a good number of organizations and people did, okay, right? But the important thing is where conditions create certain possibilities. I think it is conscious people who essentially give that extra measure of organization and direction to it that leads to change, okay? Minus that, I mean, Occupy Wall Street, all of us remember 99 versus 1%, and we'll remember shit else from that because there wasn't anything else from it, you know what I mean? In the case of even movements out of the African American community that relate to questions of police brutality and so on and so forth, we, in each one of those encounters, we learned more than just the police were after us. Because we could have told you at the beginning the police were after us. You know, what we learned is to become a little more sophisticated in using resources and other kinds of instruments, including electoral options and so forth, in order to create change. Because that's what it's about, is creating a change. And to the degree that you can get individuals who have who have the consciousness to help facilitate that, that's a plus for us, over and above conditions.
I totally agree. The other thing is lessons learned. Lessons learned, there are many lessons, but one of the lessons is to know that sometimes people who you think, sometimes you're surprised at who might be in agreement with you. For example, when I surrendered to the police, the nerve to call a meeting together that had Al Dunmore, who was the president of the editor of the Michigan Chronicle, George Crockett, who was the judge, Bob Millender, who was the attorney, and Robert, who was head of who was a member of the city council. We had to believe that these persons somehow were in tune with us. So at one point, I would not have been open to the fact, with Al Dunmore saying, we'll meet at my house. So I'm saying a lot of times there are many people who are prepared to make, commitments. And sometimes, like when I had the Black United Front, we had the Black United Front, but sometimes something can be so diverse and so big, it's hard to get some kind of focus. You got to find some way to get some kind of focus in some direction. And so one of the things I would hope we do at a time is to spend some time reflecting on today. What might we have done differently, and what would we do differently maybe if the same situation happened again? It doesn't mean we can repeat it, because history doesn't repeat itself to me in that kind of way. But we can learn lessons from our experience. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Dan. Does anybody else have questions for the panel? So I actually have one more question, Greg. I had missed this earlier. I was wondering if you can talk about the Labor Defense Coalition's defense of Nathaniel Johnson and how that bolstered the anti-stress movement. Do you remember that case?
Nathaniel Johnson?
Nathaniel Johnson?
Was that
Ken Cockrell?
James Johnson.
Is it James Johnson? Okay.
It would be James.
Okay.
It would be
Okay.
James, that's right. You can
Huh.
see Nathaniel, I'm saying, hey,
Oh, there you go.
did he catch
Yeah.
up with that one?
Yeah, my apologies. But if you could speak to that case.
There have been several instances in Detroit's history where varying practitioners in the legal community have pulled together firms and coalition work and so forth that is redound to our benefits, okay? National Lawyers Guild, a whole bunch of organizations over time. In this particular instance, with James Johnson, was that Kenny was a member of the executive board of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And I should also say that in my experience, here I am with another one of these experiences, in my experience, I've never met such a brilliant team of organizers in my life than what was embodied in that executive board of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And even as a student at that time, who was in high school and so forth, we tried to emulate that and created the Black Student United Front, which we had our executive board, and tried to, do work and all this kind of stuff. Okay. So, but Kenny, the James Johnson case is really it follows or is in the midst of a variety of other public cases that Ken was involved in, okay? Some of the more shocking ones, for example, was the Wayne County Jail suit, for example. We had a black jailer who was locking up folks. The system locked him up. He didn't lock them up himself, but the system locked them up, and they existed under horrendous conditions. And that team of radical attorneys, okay, and it was beyond just Kenny's firm, but it was a number of folks who challenged that and so forth. They also, when When Benny mentioned, for example, Ken and calling the judge a racist hunky dog and so on and so forth. In that situation, we got exposure to how the jury system was organized in the and how it systematically excluded African Americans in the juries from sitting on juries. And of course, the obvious takeaway from that is that you obviously are not being judged by your peer, because ain't nobody in that box look like you or have the same experience as you and so forth. So the James Johnson's case was really one in the series of encounters that Kenny had where he essentially used the critical circumstances that was in front of the bar to set forth a public lesson for the general community on how our society was organized. Most of the rhetoric, if you will, in the case was really directed at the community. You know, and in that case, the question was, how in the hell do you work people at such a level that essentially they break, you know? And this is before all this stuff was happening at the post office, where people were going postal and all this stuff. But it was a critical situation where he was saying that given the need for capitalism to extract the kind of profits, that the level of exploitation was so severe, was so outrageous and so forth, that it broke people. And James Johnson was one of those individuals that got broken in that regard. Kenny and them did defend them. He was charged with murder. He did not get convicted of murder. He got convicted. Well, actually, he was. I don't technically back then. I don't even know if they called this a conviction, but he was judged to have had a mental breakdown, and he was actually remanded to the mental health officials. So I think technically, somebody could challenge it. I don't think he ever got convicted, if you will, of murder in that instance. So he doesn't have that kind of shield over him that he was a murderer, because the case basically proved that if there was a murderer in town, it was the factory system and the society in which we operated in.
System on trial.
That's right, put the system on trial. Yep.
Thank you for that. And so with that, I would like to thank our panel for joining us. We appreciate you sharing this vital history. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate you.